来宾，本次会议即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备关闭或置于静音状态。谢谢您的合作。
Ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin shortly. Can we please ask for you to kindly take your seats? We would like to remind you again to switch off all mobile phones and put electronic devices to silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation.
尊敬的各位来宾，本次会议即将开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备关闭或置于静音状态。谢谢您的合作。
Ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin shortly. Can we please ask for you to kindly take your seats? We would like to remind you again to switch off all mobile phones and put electronic devices to silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation.
Distinguished Vice Chairman Wang Hong, Deputy Governor Xun Changneng, and Chief Representative Zhang Tao, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. So welcome to the 2023 Financial Street Annual Conference and the session of the PBOC. It is stressed by the government that we should coordinate our macro policy and create international environment that's favorable for development. So in the central government's financial work conference, it is mentioned that we need to promote quality development. We need to create good monetary environment and have high quality opening, comprehensively strengthen regulation, and do away with financial risks, providing financial services to the economic social development. So currently, with the macro policies kicking effect, the Chinese economy has been bouncing back. And the International Monetary Fund in 7th November, so it's changed its forecast from 5% to 5.4%. And on the other hand, the international situation is still complicated. The economic and monetary policy has been changing rapidly, which strengthened the uncertainty of our environment. So this year in March and April, a lot of banks, including the First Public Bank, Swiss Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank, Silicon Valley Bank So it testifies to the fact that we need to work together. So this annual PBOC session speak. So we believe that their thoughts and insights will certainly benefit our audience. So now let's get to the keynote speech. So first, let's give the floor to Madam Wang Hong, Vice Chairman, Chairwoman of the Beijing Municipal Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Distinguished Chairman Shen, President Shen, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. So it is a pleasure to be part of the 2023 Financial Street Forum and the PBOC session. So first, on behalf of the municipal government, I'd like to extend my congratulations to the forum, and also I'd like to extend my cordial thank you to the People's Bank of China and the guests. So currently, the change that's unseen in a century is accelerating, and the international situation is complicated, while the economic recovery is filled with uncertainty. So according to IMF, this year, economic growth of the globe is going to be 3%, and the number for 2024 is about 2.9%, which is lower than the 3.8%. That's the 20 years before the pandemic. So China advocates international dialogue and communication, which inject momentum to the global economic recovery. So we advance more inclusive and resilient global development. As is stressed by the Central Government Financial Work Conference, finance services to social development. So the theme of this session is to strengthen macro dialogue and enhance the resilience of economy. It is of significance. We believe the insight and opinions of the guests will give us more inspirations. Opening is a path we have to go for high-quality development. So this year marks the 45th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. It changed the world and influenced the world and changed China. So Beijing, as a capital city, has made a great achievements in reform and opening up, especially since the 18th National Congress deeply implemented the instructions by President Xi Jinping. So we serve and emerge into new development diagram. So we cultivate modern service industry and accelerate the building of a modern economic system with international competence. And GDP has now exceeded 4 trillion. And per capita GDP is now over 180,000, which is a front runner among the nation. As a management center for the finance, we have many financial institutions, and the task and is a place where the management authorities, headquarters, international finance situations, and infrastructures locate. The entities with license over 900, with a total asset of 200 trillion RMB, which takes about 50%, and finance is taking 20% of our GDP. It's the industry of the city. So in recent years, under the support of PBOC, so we have been pushing forward the building of 2 region and transporter financial services. We have made a lot of achievements. We have continued to strengthen collaboration with New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Tokyo. And we have held the China International Trading Services Expo and the Financial Street Forum, successfully applied for the CBOS 2024 annual conference, effectively serving international communication. Ladies and gentlemen, opening facilitate development and collaboration with the future. So we will continue to expand and open up and strengthen the function of a national finance management center. So as to make our own contribution to a nation that's strong in finance. So there are a lot of opportunities involved. With this opportunity, we are confident of Beijing's development, and we sincerely hope that all the guests and all the leaders will continue to support this development of Beijing and create beautiful together. So at last, I'd like to wish this session a complete success. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chairwoman Wang Hong. So next, we will give the floor to the Deputy President of PBOC, Mr. Xuan Changnong, to give us keynote speech. Distinguished Vice Chairwoman Wang Hong, Mr. Zhang Tao, and Chairman Gu Shu, and Director Liu, President Mr. Colin James, Mr. Stephen Latouche, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here in the 2023 Financial Street Annual Conference. So the theme this evening is very interesting, and it's a great pleasure to be here to discuss with you. So currently, our world economy is in a period of adjustment. Its growth has been slow and uneven, and the liquidity has been tightened, and the influence of geopolitical conflict needs to be monitored. So the Central Government Finance World Conference indicated that we need to push forward the high-quality development of finance to ensure the finance and economic security of this nation, to expand institutional opening up in finance, to improve the facilitation of investment, to attract more long-term capitals and financial institutions to come to China, to strengthen policy dialogue, helps to coordinate policies to generate new momentum, improve resilience, and realize sustainable development and collaboration. So next, I'd like to talk about three things. First, China's economy has been turning for the better. Since the beginning of this year, with the kicking into effect of the macro policies, the major economic indicators of China have been improved. So in our economic operation, the positive factors have been accumulating. There are more highlights, and expectations has been turning for the better. In the first three quarters, GDP growth has been grown about 5.2%, in Q3 about 4.9%, which is about 1.3% growth. So it's extended the good momentum we had before, and industrial production has accelerated. Industrial growth is 0.2% faster than the first half of the year in Q3, and the industrial revenue grew by 7.7%. Service, important momentum for economic recovery, and released. Market vitality improves. Q3, and the added value of this industry grew by 5.2%, which contributed to 2% of economic growth. And new momentum continue to grow. Strategic new industries continue to develop and become stronger. Digital economy, photovoltaic, and EVs, we are now running the front runner of the world. In the first three quarters, investment in high-tech industries increased by 63%, 34%, and 26.7%. And international dividend has able to achieve a growth of 5%, which is still a very good one among the major economies, and will continue to become a very important engine and stabilizer for the world economy. So as Mr. Chen just mentioned, IMF recently, just this week, has turned up China's economic growth to 5.4%. And secondly, the international situation has been the globe is facing and challenges. Momentum and are important factors that influence in the future economic growth. According to the World Economic Forecast of IMF, world economic growth is expected to slow from 3.5% to 3% and 2.9%, and the contractionary monetary policies for the developed economies is a big problem. And so there was a big influence to the consumption. For emerging economies, it is divided. So the strengthening liquidity has increased the uncertainties for the high debt economy. So with the release of the inflation stress, and there is a heightened risks of depression. So the central banks need to end their interest boost. So this kind of monetary policy is going to have a less effect on the market, but for some reason, some pay a lot of attention. For geopolitical tensions from Israel and Palestine, for Russia and Ukraine, it is still continuing. So the conflict is still influencing the stability and for our trade environment and supply chain, which is having a big influence on commodities, increasing the difficulty for macro policies. From the progress of green recovery since the eruption of the pandemic, so the expenditure for grain does not reach their promise. So the expenditure is not enough to cope with the environmental crisis, nature problems, and pollutions.
Strengthening international macro policy dialogue and coordination. Economic globalization is the trend of the times and the desire of the people. Open cooperation and mutual benefit are the wise choices. Since the 18th National Congress of the CPC China, the People's Bank of China has taken President Xi Jinping's thought as its work guidance. Guided by the global governance concept secretary, and we have actively participated in global financial governance and policy coordination through global governance platforms and mechanisms, such as the Group of 20, G20, and IMF, and the Bank for International Settlements, and the Multilateral Development Bank. We have contributed to China's wisdom and shared China's experience, and demonstrate the responsibility of China as a big major country that's responsible. At present, the world has entered a new period of turbulence and change, and the global governance system is in a critical period of adjustment and change. The People's Bank of China will continue to actively participate in international economic and financial governance in accordance with the requirements of the Secretary Xi Jinping. And days ago, in the face of the complex and grim international situation, we sincerely hope that we will strengthen dialogue and deepen cooperation. First, we will effectively strengthen international macroeconomic policy dialogue and coordination, especially at a time where economic growth, risk prevention, digital economy, green development, climate change, as well as other important new changes in the world. Second, we will firmly press ahead with the reform of global financial governance reform and build a fairer and more efficient global financial system. We will also support the relevant international financial organizations to better adjust its quota contribution, budget contribution, and better reflect the relative position of member countries in the global economy, and improve and strengthen the voice and representation of emerging markets and developing countries in the organizations. Third, we will maintain the authority and effectiveness of the multilateral trading system. We will advance the bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation. We will resolutely oppose our politicization of economic and trade issues. Fourth, and we will strengthen exchanges and cooperation in the field of green finance. China is striving to achieve the dual carbon goals. The PBOC will adhere to the concept of green and apply to the functions of resources allocation, risk management, and the market pricing of the green finances. We stand ready to share the Chinese experience in the environment-related information release and etc. We stand ready to work with other countries in building the green financial standards as well as building the financial policy framework for the transformation of the relevant countries. Finally, I thank you for your kind care and long-term support to the PBOC. I wish this 2023 Financial Street Forum a full success. Thank you. I thank the Deputy Governor, Mr. Xuan, and in his speech, he mentioned that China is recovering in its economy and has been playing a key engine role for driving the global economic growth. Faced with the profound changes as well as the uncertainties in the global financial landscape, Mr. Xuan, the Vice Governor Xuan, has advocated that China stand ready to build an open international financial system. As Vice Governor Xuan has mentioned, in this new era, cooperation and openness and for mutual benefit is the dominant trend of the time. Next keynote speaker is the Chief Representative, the BIS Office of Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Zhang Tao. Now you have the floor. I thank you, Your Excellencies, Deputy Governor Mr. Xuan, Chang Neng, and Vice Chairman Wang Hong, and dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests, good evening. It's such a pleasure to attend the 2023 Financial Street and this annual conference, in particular, this sub-forum organized by the PBOC. It is a pleasure to talk with you on this topic of strengthening international policy dialogue and enhancing global economic and financial resilience. And I work with the BIS. It's an international financial organization. So next, I will speak in English.
I'm very glad to join Deputy Governor Chen Changneng and other colleagues at today's forum. The theme of this year's forum, strengthen international macro policy dialogue, enhance global economic and financial resilience, is particularly fitting in today's environment. The world economy faces multiple challenges, some of which we have not seen in decades. The simultaneous emergence of high inflation and financial stability risks, the heightened market volatility, and an increasingly uncertain global outlook amid the wars in Ukraine and most recently in the Middle East, just to name a few. In such a challenging environment, cooperations and dialogue on international macro policy issues is mandatory, but itself is a commodity of shortages, which has also become ever more important. Central banks and policymakers have important roles to play in enhancing global economic and financial resilience and fostering sustainable growth in the longer run. Given the nature and the role of the BIS, which is the collections of central banks, My remarks tonight will largely focus on monetary policy, inflation, and financial stability. Of course, I will also touch on digital innovations, which has become an increasingly important and integral part of the BIS work in the most recent years. So let me first talk about inflation, which is the, as we always saying these days, the last mile challenge of disinflation. Okay. I have my staff prepared the PPT, basically tell you the headline inflations and the core inflations. As we can see, global inflation has come down from its mid-2022 peaks, but is still much too high in much of the world. In particular, while headline inflations as captured in year-on-year terms by black lines has declined considerably, core inflation measured by the red dashed lines has proven to be much stickier. Such a stickiness in core inflation is even apparent in emerging Asia, but not include China, though it is generally much lower than other emerging economies, as you can see on the right-hand side. A significant part of the recent decline in inflation reflects the fading of transitory factors. And these factors, such as the surge in commodity prices induced by the war in Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions induced by the pandemic. Of course, this is also very much attributed to the forceful and coordinated monetary tightening by most of the central banks around the world. Normally we say this is synchronization of the central bank. The BIS estimated that almost 95% of central banks around the world hiked their interest rate between early 2021 and mid-2023. In doing so, the central banks, delivered collective monetary restraint that was more than the sum of its parts. Discussions among central banks, including those happened in Basel, which is headquarters of the BIS, has proved to be able to play some of the useful roles I would like to think. However, we should note that the easy gains that largely have been banked. On the other hand, services where prices, as captured in the blue proportion bar of the slide, have become the main force behind inflations at the global level. At the same time, labor markets are still tight, particularly in some of the advanced economies. So, the message is there is a risk that high inflation will persist. In this context, interest rates may need to stay higher and for longer than previously thought. So here in Asia, as I mentioned earlier, inflation is generally lower than the advanced economy counterparts. However, the inflation in Asia are at or close to targets in most of the Asian economies, largely thanks to the forceful actions taken by the central banks in the region and the development and the deployment of policy tools flexibly. Though with the from the Middle East conflict and the strengthening of the US dollars, some Asian central banks have resumed hiking, for example, in Indonesia and the Philippines recently. And of course, we should recognize that there is a high degree of heterogeneity across entire Asia and policy responses. For example, the two largest economies in the region, China and Japan, have maintained accommodative monetary policy, but I think they keep a very close look at the situations and very alert to what's happening on the ground and always ready to change, try to adapt whenever it's needed. Second, let me turn to financial stability risks. While global economy continues to show some resilience and inflation is on somewhat downward path, serious financial strains emerged. Financial vulnerabilities are widespread globally and in Asia as well. For example, public and private debt levels are at historically high. Asset prices, especially those of the real estate, are elevated. And risk-taking in financial markets was rife during a long phase of historically low interest rates. In fact, signs of strains have already started to emerge. Some regional banks in the United States closed their doors, and Credit Suisse merged with its competitors, UBS, and as Governor Shen just mentioned. The recent rise in yield intensified financial stability risks. Given the high debt environment, the latest rise is expected to further strain borrowers. Therefore, banks in the region and to a large extent in the world need to brace themselves for a wave of credit losses if borrowers start to feel the full impact of higher interest rate. So financial stability risk together with high inflation is particularly daunting to deal with. If not addressed properly, these short-term challenges could entrench themselves as long-term. So next, I would like to say a few words about policy responses. How should policymakers respond to these large and unique challenges and to enhance economic resilience? The topic, the theme of today's discussions. I would like to see a prolonged approach that involves monetary policy, thus leaves monetary policy higher degrees of freedom to fight inflation. From a more structural perspective in the BIS view, we need to fill the gaps in prudential regulations by implementing Basel III in full and without delay. Strengthening the bite of supervisions and drawing lessons from the recent terms about the regulatory framework. Fiscal policies has also had an important role to play in supporting growth and jobs, but excessive fiscal expansions can also push up public debt levels and pose financial stability risks. More importantly, policy need to adopt in the longer terms focus. Higher financial stabilities were no accident. They were the result of a long journey. monetary policy should not be the only game in town. As argued by BIS, fiscal policy, together with monetary, deployed within the boundaries of what we call the region of stabilities, which basically refers to the combinations of monetary and fiscal policy that delivers sustainable macroeconomic and financial stabilities. History shows that overstepping these boundaries can trigger higher inflation, economic slumps, and banking, currency, and sovereign debt crises. So I think I have 5 minutes, but let me talk a little bit about Asia, particularly emerging Asia. Emerging Asia economies have weathered the storm well since the pandemic. In many of them, central banks tightened policy earlier and faster than in advanced economies. The experience of many Asian central banks in combating high inflations in the past decades came in handy in this time around. I would like to point out a most recent report published by BIS but prepared by the regional central banks on financial stabilities. The overcharting takeaway from this heat map is that while there was one primary tool for achieving each policy objectives, several supplementary tools were also used. The policy rate, on average, was the primary tool for achieving the price stability objectives in 2022. However, interventions in domestic bond and money market, foreign exchange interventions, and domestic liquidity provisions were also used to maintain macroeconomic stabilities, albeit less frequently or less intensively. Meanwhile, domestically oriented macroprudential measures were the primary tools for domestic financial stability objectives in 2022, which is often supported by domestic currency liquidity provisions, by the policy rate, and by interventions in domestic market. And finally, foreign exchange interventions were the first line of the defense with respect to the external stability objectives. And foreign exchange liquidity provisions and capital flow management measures also played supportive role. So that's the overall messages. So let me conclude. The global economy is now at the crossroad, with the policymakers facing a unique set of challenges. To deal with these challenges and putting the global economy and financial stability on a firmer footing, requires both enhanced and earnest dialogue on macro policies and the implementations of long-ignored growth-enhancing structured reforms. There are no shortcuts, and we don't have much time left to waste. So with that, let me thank you again for the invitations, and I look forward to hearing views and thoughts from other speakers and participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang Tao, for your speech. So Mr. Zhang Tao shared with us the policies in Asia Pacific and globally, and give us a basket of suggestions. He stressed that we need to strengthen policy dialogue and communication, and the BIS will continue to strengthen the dialogue and collaboration between the central banks of different nations. It's going to play a more important role And our next part is, first we invite Mr. Gu Shu, Chairman of Board, Agricultural Bank of China. You have 12 minutes, and there is going to be a alarm.
尊敬的宣昌能副行长、王宏副主席、张涛首席代表，尊敬的刘世金老师。
Distinguished guests, guests, it is an honor to be part of this People's Bank of China session. And just now, Mr. Xuan and Mr. Zhang Tao shared with us from the perspective of policy coordination, the coordination between monetary policy and fiscal policy. So they provided very good insight. So next, starting from the practices of the agricultural bank, I'd like to share with you from the perspective of a commercial bank. So the first thing I want to share with you is that China's economy still is resilient. As is mentioned by everyone, we mentioned the latest forecast by IMF. So this year, the global growth is going to be 3%, and China's growth is going to be 5.4%, contributing to 30% to the world economy, being the most important engine for the world economic growth. From the data of the first 3 quarters, the general situation of China's economy is recovering, and economy and finance are actually existing together, combining our operational data. So this kind of resilience comes from the following a few aspects. First, the resilience comes from the core of our super-sized market. We have 1.4 billion population and per capita GDP over 112,000 US dollars. So this is a very important advantage of our economy. Although the pandemic is lingering, but thanks to the policies that boost the internal demand and confidence, demand continues to expand, and active factors are accumulating. In the first 3 quarters, according to the data from the Statistics Bureau, so consumption contribute to over 80% of economic growth, and the financial demand has expanded, especially for EV, tourism. Taking the number of our bank, for example, by September, and the personal loans exceeded 8 trillion, consumption loan and operational loan, the growth of those 2 categories has exceeded 18% and 30%. And second, this resilience comes from the foundation of our modernized industrial system. So we are the only country that has all the categories defined by the United Nations in labor division, and take a very important position. And our added value for manufacturing has been number 1 for 13 in a row, taking about 30% globally. From the demand of our bank, so the advanced manufacturing, green transformation, the loan growth in those 2 areas has been significant. By the end of September, in manufacturing, loan has reached 3 trillion, which is about 30% growth than the beginning of the year. And for mid-term and long-term loan, was at 53%. For green credit, 3.8 trillion, which is about 42% increase. And third, the resilience comes from the innovation. So China is innovating the strategy of innovation-driven. So in the year of 2022, R&D investment exceeded 3 trillion, which increased to 2.54%. And the contribution of scientific progress has been over 60%. New energy, new material, and high-end equipment, the demand in those areas has been accelerating. By the end of September, we have over 1.9 trillion for strategic new industries, which is much higher than average. And for the science and technology businesses, over 556,000. So I'd like to share with you the second thing is, so we need to contribute our strengths. So as a commercial bank and a main force that supports our physical economy, we know our responsibility to help the economy to grow, strengthen our finance supply for prioritized areas, for manufacturing, recuperation of rural areas, providing financial services for economic growth. By the end of September, the asset scale reached 38.7 trillion, and for loan, 22.3 trillion. So at county level, about 8.65 trillion, accounting for 40% of the total. And according to the statistics of PBOC, for inclusive loan over 3.5 trillion, which is a growth of 38%. The quality of assets have been improved, and for non-performing loans, 1.5%. So we mainly have done the following works. So first, we have been a leader in serving the countryside. So we have the advantage we have different distributions of outlets in different areas, so that we can provide more financial services to the farmer household and expand the channels for the farmers to grow, so that the farmers and countryside can become rich together with the rest of the population.
In terms of resource allocation, customer evaluation, access, and the talent team construction, we have built a complete set of a policy system oriented to support the scientific and technological innovation, and brought into play the comprehensive financial license function for large commercial bank groups. And we have flexibly used cross-market financial instruments such as supply chain finance. Third, we have vigorously supported the green and low-carbon transformation of the economy. And fourth, we promote the expansion of inclusive finance, reduce costs, and improve quality. Inclusiveness is the basic requirement of a modern financial system and the common social responsibility of all commercial banks. In order to help the small, micro, and vulnerable groups who have been affected by the pandemic, we have extended them with our full support. Last but not least, we have also strived to achieve high-quality development as a financial institution. The just concluded Central Financial Work Conference has clear that financial institutions should further strengthen resilience, accelerate transformation and innovation, and actively respond to various risk challenges. What we need to do, first, we need to improve our strategic management capabilities. In the face of profound changes in the current international and external situation, both domestic and abroad, financial institutions should always maintain strategic determination and actively promote the business development and align its strategy with national strategy. And it should aim for high-quality development, and while at the same time, it should extend a greater support to the science and technology finance, green finance, inclusive finance, pension finance, and digital finance. As the commercial bank, we also need to fully display our advantage in terms of our customer base and etc. Probably because for the decades, we have been focused on serving our customers and to serve the agriculture, to serve the farmer, and to serve the urban areas of development. And we have been able to be more confident in operating our business. And the second, we will continue to improve the transformation and innovation in our operation. In the face of the transformation of economic environment, and we will continue to improve our management system. We need to be professional, provide better service to create greater value. And also we need to apply the digital technology into our own service provision. And we need to use the technology to make our service more compatible with the demands of our customers. Third, risk control capability is a must. And the risk control capability actually determines the business boundary, the service level, and the innovation capability of a financial institution. At present, factors such as repricing of global financial assets, aggregation of a financial market volatility, and etc. In response, we should coordinate the relationship between development and safety, accelerate the improvement of active risk management capability, innovate our digital risk control means, and prevent risks in advance. We need to identify it, we need to diffuse it, and we also to improve anything that's related to risk at an early date. And we also need to build up a cross-infection prevention firewall. Looking forward, Agricultural Bank of China will actively cooperate with the EU and to contribute to the resilience of a global economic and financial system and contribute our energy to a better world economy. Thank you very much. I Chairman, and he was on time and no 1 minute ahead, no 1 minute behind. And for the big financial commercial banks, they are actually the staunch foundation for China's economic growth. And in Chairman Gu's speech, he has elaborated on the resilience as well as the potential of the Agricultural Bank of China in supporting the national economic growth, and will continue to contribute to China as a major responsible country. Next, I give floor to the former Vice Minister, the Development Research Center of the State Council, and a member of the Monetary Policy Committee, and from the People's Bank of China, Mr. Liu Shijing, to address us. Your Excellencies, Governor Xuan, and dear colleagues, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, I think that in my speech, I will talk about the potential of China's economic growth as well as its relation to the global economic landscape. Since the beginning of this year, China's economy has shaken off the impact of the pandemic and has entered a recovery track. The first quarter did quite well, but in the second quarter, we faced the pressure of a weak demand and unstable expectations. In the third quarter, we grow by 4.9%, and the forecast for the year is around 5.2%. But even so, last year the growth rate was only 3%. So on average, across the 2 years, we grow by only 4% in these 2 years. The 2 years before the pandemic, the average growth rate was 5.1%. So it means that growth rate in the recent 2 years was lower than the 2 years before that, and it's lower than the 5.5% generally considered by the academia. But the background is that China's economy is still in a transition from high-speed growth to quality growth. In the first quarter of 2010 And after a growth peak, China's economy has entered a high-speed to medium-speed transitional channel. In the past 10 years, the main driving forces such as infrastructure, real estate, and exports, they have decelerated. But when the economy slowed down and when we spend more energy on those sectors, they can still support the economy. But so far, the real estate industry is not supporting, but we are seeing something that's not very promising in the infrastructure and exports. So the lesson we learned is that the old tricks does not work right now, and we need the new means to grow the economy. We are still exploring. There is a popular view that China's current economic development is quite similar to that of Japan after its bubble economy burst in the early 1990s. In the 1990s, Japan changed from a medium speed economic growth to a low speed, and then to a zero, even a negative growth rate. The reason has been explained as a balance sheet degradation. It means that when the collapse of the real estate department, the sector, and the financial bubbles burst after the collapse of corporate assets, the debt ratio will be too high, so that the corporate income and used to repay the debt and could not be enough for investment. But I don't think China is fully resembling that of Japan. That's the reason because Japan experienced a rapid growth rate of 9% in the 1950s to 1960s and entered a medium speed growth period of about 5% in the early 1970s when the oil crisis occurred. In the early 1990s, Japan entered a low-speed growth rate. If we must compare to Japan, China is still at the medium-speed growth stage, that's growing by around 5%. Second, from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, Japan's per capita GDP was in the forefront of developed countries and has once surpassed the United States for a time. At present, China's per capita GDP has just exceeded the US dollar 12,000, which is much lower than that of the America, which is 70th. And the third, and we are seeing that Japan fall into a slow growth in the 1990s, mainly due to a decline in its structural potential and a lack of new growth engines. And so, even if the balance sheet is not problematic, investment and economic growth are difficult. For China, if we are going to enter a steady growth track, the key is to explore the new growth potentials, but the precondition is that we still have that potential. Here, I would like to propose to share with you my thoughts on the two new growth potentials. The first one is the horizontal demand space. Simply put it is to narrow the gap between the low-income group and the middle-income group, including all the consumables like the house, like the infrastructure for the well-being, and that is the input into non-production activities. So to narrow the demand gap so that the consumption here in China will be more that to the medium and the high income groups. And there is a saying that 500 million people in China have not been used to use a toilet, and the billion have not actually traveled by the airplane. So if we do not upgrade our industry and if we keep its existing size, and we need to increase the demand. And I said vertical upgrade. It refers to upgrading the technological content and add value of the industry. And what we can do is first upgrade the value chain of the existing industries, and the second, to promote the generation and the development of new industries or the future industries. The digital technology and the green transformation will fully enable this vertical upgrading. Expanding the horizontal demand space, we will more focus on the demand side. But for the vertical one, it is more focusing on the supply side. And put it short, to expand the horizontal is to stabilize the growth, and to foster the vertical driving force is to promote the transformation and developing at a higher quality. So those potentials for Chinese economy is real, but the question is how we can fully display those potentials. Sometimes we say something, but we cannot grasp it. When there is a weak growth, and the market participants will often issue calls to relax macro policies. Macro policies are of course important for stabilizing growth, but while clarifying what macro policies can do, we should also clarify what macro policies cannot do, especially for the Chinese economy. The macro policy used to play a short-term effect, but the driving force still comes from the structural potentials. That is, developed economies have already done something, but we have not experienced. But we are in a position to do it. We have set ourselves the goal of reaching the level of per capita income of middle-income countries by 2035. From now to 2035, we actually need to improve our $13,000 per capita GDP to the one that has been reached by the developed countries. At the same time, we need to seize the growth opportunities provided by the new technologies, the digital technology, the green transformation, and etc. So the new technologies as well as the catch-up potential will prove to be a credible growth potential. What we need to do is we need to maintain a relatively loose monetary and fiscal policy while turning more attention to tapping the structural transformation to fully display its structural advantage. So not just that the macro policy will generate short-term effects, but structural reforms with expansionary effect can also have immediate effects.
So currently, we should start a round of structural reform that stabilizes the medium and long-term growth. So the priorities including the structural reform prioritizing providing basic services for the rural population getting to the cities, to stabilize the pillar industries including real estate, to spur industrial upgrade and supply side reform so as to expand demand and to do away with the financial risks. So it is a debt and reform. So those are actually the macro policies and structural changes. It is not difficult to find out that different countries have different macro policies. It has to do with the stages they are in. So currently, the interest boost is coming to an end, but there are still uncertainties. And China still needs to relatively loose policies. So this mismatch between China and the U.S. has to do with the policies orientations in the pandemic, and it's more influenced by the different stages of us. So under such background, it is necessary for the two countries to coordinate their policy. So, on the other hand, we are on the threshold of high-income nation. So, we are in the channel of getting into a middle high-income country. So, how to get escape gap to become really innovation-driven, and how to effectively coordinate structural reform and macro policies. It's central. Those issues need our careful study, and we need to absorb the positive and negative experiences. And so as to advance our economic development and at the same time provide more positive to our economy. Thank you, Mr. Liu. So he said that China is still transitioning from high-speed development to high-quality development. There is horizontal and vertical room for development. And he also talked about how to develop those potentials and provided some suggestions. So as he spoke, it was back in 2012, he did a report at the World Bank, and the title was China in 2023. The report was done 12 years ago to build a creative, high-income society. China's strategic choices and international experiences. I was working in the city of Xi'an. I really carefully studied that report. Ideas such as structural reform was proposed, and he also suggested we should seize the development of green development. Everybody should have basic guarantee and equal development opportunities, and other sustainable financial arrangement, as well as this mutual beneficial relationship with the rest of the world. It was already mentioned in the year of 2012 and 2011. So we can compare those. Our next speaker is the chief expert of the national think tank, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the People's Bank of China, Mr. Cai Fang. Distinguished leaders, distinguished guests, good evening. President Xi Jinping indicated that to serve the physical economy is the natural responsibility of the financial system. So here I'd like to talk a little about our economic transition, economic development, and also the businesses, providing some background. So this is my title, The New Normal, Development Challenges, and just Transitioning of Our Financial System. So we can see, so what is this new normal? In 2013, General Secretary Xi Jinping proposed an idea that China's economic development is recognize, adapt to, and lead the new normal. It is a very big logic behind our economic development. And at the same time, in the year of 2023, in the first meeting of the Central Government Financial Committee, it is proposed that an idea of population development new norm was proposed. We should recognize, adapt to, and lead this new trend with high-quality development of our population to support the modernization of China. So actually, we have two new normals. When they meet each other, I think its influences on the Chinese economy gives us some extra challenges, which are different from the challenges that we had before. Of course, there are new opportunities as well. So I'd like to speak about from the perspectives. First, the new norm of economic development. So this is a review. It's been 10 years already. So I'd like to especially stress that I'd like to provide a perspective from population, demographic change, because for demographic, so it goes towards one direction. It determines our economic development. So first, let's look at this chart. The economic development of this country is relevant to our demographic change. So when you have some insight, you can understand the nature of your economic development instead of the phenomenons. So here I can only show you one picture. So this is our birth rate. So maybe you don't know that starting from the 1970s, it has been decreasing significantly. So that blue curve is our birth rate. By 1991, China's total birth rate has been decreased to lower than 2.1, which means that the children you give birth to will not compensate you. So this red line is 2.1. You can see after that it continues to decline. So it is destined that demographers in China know that one day China is going to get into the negative territory in population. Of course, before that we have a lowering of labor population. We knew that, but nobody hears that. Therefore, we need to take a look at these changes and how it influences the two new normals. The first one, as you said, proposed by the General Secretary in his speech in 2013, and the growth speed of the Chinese economy, we do not guarantee 7, 8. We have given up on that goal in 2012. The reason was that in the year of 2011, the labor population reached a peak. As you can see before that, at least for 30 years in a row, in the first 30 years of reform and opening up, the labor population has been increasing significantly, and the non-labor population, under 15, over 60, was stable. So this difference gives us a very good boost. So that's what we call as population dividend. And labor continues to increase our productivity. So with abundant labor, you invest, and then you reap the benefits, you get the return. So it was the economic growth model at that time. But if you look at 2010, 2011, it peaked, and then the two curves began to merge. So that's the first one new normal. The core is the decline of the potential growth rate. So this is the supply side. Back in 2011, we estimated and forecasted in the future what's going to happen. It was by 2050, the potential growth of this country. And now we compare the potential growth, and as you can see on this chart, it's totally in line with each other. I'm not bragging about our forecast. Of course, it was accurate, but what I'm trying to say here is the reason why these curves are in line with each other was because the logic was our potential growth rate. It was not impacted by the demand side. But now we need to look at the new normal, what's going to happen. So the situation is now different. According to the first meeting of the Financial Committee of the central government, so basically there are three characteristics. The first one is aging, people are giving birth to less babies, and also the regional differences. So for different regions, the trends are different. As you can see on this chart, our growth rate, the blue curve, in the past few years has been declining, and for some time it seems to grow, but it was a data issue, but the general trend was declining. Starting from the year of 2021, birth rate peaked, and from last year, in the decades, we cannot see positive growth. And secondly, meanwhile, aging has been accelerating, as you can see in the red curve. So now it's a key point for us. The year of 2021, the population at 65 and above 65 is over 14%, which means that actually I checked many data for other countries. We mixed a lot of data. So the conclusion is that your consumption will decline. And secondly, your saving rate will be increased, which means that this is called a long-term stagnation. Investment demand and consumption demand are insufficient. So this new normal is already predicted. So we're not getting into this area yet, but the population is already showing this trend, and aging may cause a decline in demand, but there's still potentials. And the next one is the imbalanced development for different regions. So let's separate the regions into 4 categories: the eastern part of China, middle part of China, western, and northeastern. So if you look at the demographic change of those areas, whether they are positive or negative, local population or the population from other areas. So we do a lot of calculations, flowing in, flowing out. So we can see that for those different regions and different provinces, their demographic change is actually in line with their economic growth. So it proves that population is critical to the economic development of a certain region. So, and also it influences your future economic prospect that you can't imagine and cannot imagine.
And last but not least, and there are 2 new normals. And when they meet, what they generate, and what challenges what we see. First, the negative growth in population means that the total population is suffering from a negative growth. But in this negative growth, in terms of the democratic structure, you may see that the working age population is growing at accelerated pace. And we believe that is decreasing, not increasing. And we believe that since this watershed point, you may find the decrease of a working population will decrease even greater. And after that, since 2022, you may see that there is a negative 7.6%, and since 2032, the negative growth in the working population will be minus 9.3%. And on the supply side, we may mean that this new more normal is continuing to exerting an impact. So this is the greater challenge to the supply side challenge. The other one is this demand factor become normal constraints. And this shows that we do not have a systematic and not a systematic shock, but long-term growth in the economy will be greatly impacted by the supply side challenge. Before the pandemic, let's take a look at this. Before 2019, a decade before that, you may find our export has almost contributed 0 or negative to the GDP. Investment contribution is also declining. This is quite remarkable. This is also a key characteristic of our transitioned economy. But on the other hand, you may find the consumption. Consumption is play an ever greater role in contributing to the GDP, and at different times you may find there are changes to the consumption. But generally speaking, if we do not have the strong support of consumption, we will find it very hard to support the economy. So this is a new constraint. This is the dual new normal. And this is the supply side in particular. The citizens' consumption has become a normal constraint to the economic growth. For this normal constraint to the economy, there are many rippling effects. The most prominent one is the population growth. So for those who are born, they may not be a working population, but they should be a consuming population. So they will be consumer. And as long as the income grows, the consumption will highly grow. But I would like to say, so I'm close to the conclusion. For the aging society, there is an effect on the demographic structure. The blue curve line, the horizontal one represents the ages. The vertical one represents the consumption. So you may find that after 20 and before 60, and you have your income, and it means that you are a working population. For the orange lines, it's the per capita consumption at the different ages. And it means they have the varied intention to consume, and they have the varied capability to consume. For the first interaction between the orange and the blue one, they represent the kids. They are the youth. They consume a lot, although they do not have a lot of income. So we realize that this group of people is decreasing in the number, although they are big consumer, but they're not in a big enough population to support China's economic growth. And at the very central, you may find they are the working population. They face the challenges. For example, we will not say it's a 3 mountains, but they are the 3 debts. They need to pay. They need to contribute to the pension system. So if for the younger generation, they pay at the cost of consumption. And the second, for the family, and they also need to take care of the elderly in their families. So this will also divert some money from their potential consumption. The other one is, for example, for the pension, you have a pay for the retirees. But when I retire, so the ratio of worker supporting the elderly person will dramatically change. So the challenge is the preventative. There need to be some saving. So for this group of people, they have a less desire to consume. So by the age of a senior citizen, you may find they have a greater consumption capability, and that's to a great extent because of their consumption, the medical care. And you may also find that there are some cares and there are some caring burdens, and so those can all be the factors constraining their consumption. So this is also a new normal. So we need to address this point, how to expand, in the long term, for a long term, expand the consumption capability. So the development challenges and the financial responses. Just one slide. Let me read them. First, in China, the more the potential growth rate will depend on the productivity gain. And it means that we need to improve our productivity instead of just the input into the production factors. We need to shift the driving engine of our economy. The traditional financial sector used to mobilize a lot of resources or accumulate the resources and also to nurture the industry. So this is the basic function of the financial sector. But beyond that, in the future, there needs to be a new function to the financial sector. That is to support the innovative disruptions, because in the future, the productivity increase is not a synchronized increase. But those who are a leader will survive. Those who are lagging behind will be actually expelled from the market. So this is what the financial market should consider about in terms of increasing their capability. And the second, the speed of growth requires that the financial sector need to shift from its growth spurring role. It used to work to help the cycled economic challenges, but now sometimes are quite novel and which falls not under the traditional macro monetary policies. And we need to better utilize the financial sector. We used to support the big ones, the great ones, but now we need to use the technology to support the public finance to meet the demands of the small and medium-sized enterprises. And also for the citizen consumption, sort of for the financial sector, it needs to transition itself from an investor to someone who are good at serving the citizen, serving the families. This is also a skill the financial sector needs to newly acquire. To maintain a rational growth rate, reform is necessary, and that's also the case for the financial sector. And financial sector reform need to consider about how it can better safeguard the growth of the economy, and how reform and opening up can actually help itself better meet the demands of increased consumption. There will be dividends from the reform. And the financial sector, if they support the economy, it will definitely benefit from the economic growth. So this is my thoughts. Thank you. I thank you, Mr. Cai Peng. And in Mr. Liu's speech, there are two driving forces, and in Mr. Cai's speech, there are two new normalities. And Mr. Cai mentioned about the intersection as well as the encounter of both the new driving force and the traditional one. His speech actually recalled my classes that happened in the 1990s. We were attending his class about the dual transformation of China as well as its impact on China economic reform. Next, I give floor to Chief Financial Officer and the Management Board Member, European Stability Mechanism, Mr. Kalin Aniv Jens. He will talk online. Let's welcome.
Share something in common with my own institution, the European Stability Mechanism. Both were founded in 2012. The ESM was born in October that year. The ESM, together with its temporary predecessor, the European Financial Stability Facility, provided loans of nearly 300 such as the loss of capital market access. These were Greece, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and Cyprus. We succeeded to counter the European financial crisis. In 2020, Europe demonstrated solidarity to counter the pandemic with an initial €540 billion policy response. ESM created a pandemic crisis support, a sovereign credit line worth 2% of GDP of the euro area countries. Post-crisis, Europe turned to matters on how to recover and rebuild, as well as how to prevent future shocks and reinforce financial stability. In Europe, in the past 13 years, such changes came for the better. 5 euro area member states that required ESM's help successfully concluded their programs. The euro crisis was defeated. Moreover, Greece, one of those countries that needed financial assistance, reformed and has prospered. Greece also regained investment grade in a credit rating upgrade, notably by Standard & Poor's last month, a major achievement. Financial stability has been restored and has markedly helped us weather other challenges, such as the global pandemic. It is also important to note that over the last decade, 4 countries joined the euro area: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and this year, Croatia. Like other parts of the world, Europe now faces other challenges, which include geopolitical and inflation risks. These are imminent challenges. For my presentation to you today, I would like to include a few visuals. In an ESM blog published last month, I offered a debrief on the 6 takeaways from the International Monetary Fund World Bank meetings in Marrakesh last month. Geopolitics dominated the agenda, especially the recent conflict in the Middle East. But so, too, did the growing realization that we may be facing a longer period of high interest rates. Recent market expectations that interest rates could fall in 2024 are evaporating. This is also a perception among many in the financial community that monetary and fiscal policies globally are not always aligned. With more than 2 billion people eligible to vote in 2024, there is also electoral uncertainty. In some countries, that can result in a spendthrift by government policies, rather than a disciplined approach to budgets. But as I suggested already, we are in a more resilient economic and financial circumstance in Europe than a decade ago. This is also true globally. The global financial safety net is stronger than during the 2008 global financial crisis that spurred the European sovereign debt crisis. At national level, governments protect their economies against external shocks by drawing upon foreign reserves or use fiscal capacity. At a bilateral level, swap lines provide an important source of financial security between major central banks. At regional level, there are regional financial arrangements, such as the ESM, or in Asia, there is AMRO, safeguarding 14 economies, including China. At global level, the IMF providing a financial backstop. At 500 billion, the ESM and FSF singularly have the largest financing firepower of the regional financial arrangements. But we can only succeed to overcome future shocks if we work together. That is why it is imperative that we foster stronger ties between the RFAs. Last month, the 8th high-level RFAs dialogue was held in Marrakesh. in the margins of the IMF World Bank annual meetings. Amidst a precarious global economic recovery, the discussion focused on how crisis fighters contribute to macroeconomic and financial stability in a more shock-prone world and the role of IMF-RFA collaboration. We can see the effect of what solidarity and cooperation can do. When the 2010 financial crisis spread globally in Europe, we did not yet have the EFSF and ESM institutions. This chart starkly shows how the financial markets punished the absence of shock absorbers in Europe. But by 2015, when Greece needed more financial assistance, which the ESM provided, you can see that even the 10-year GGB spreads versus German Bunds were less than half of that experienced 5 years earlier. By 2020, when the pandemic became a systemic risk for Europe, GGB spreads widened even less. Over time, Europe's financial architecture has convinced markets, and we see less volatility and lower spreads. Europe was able to calm markets. In all cases, these market effects became less pronounced as the amount of European solidarity grew. And in the case of the pandemic, markets were impressed at how quickly, within weeks, European institutions came together for a pandemic policy response, involving the European Central Bank, the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, and the ESM. As you can see in this chart, there is an even wider European financial architecture, which additionally comprises market regulators. In less than a decade, we built a robust and convincing market, financial, and banking architecture. In addition to ESM's role to provide financial assistance to euro area member states, as well as uphold monitoring to prevent crisis, these roles will be enhanced by a treaty reform which is presently awaiting ratification. The ESM will apply tools to help the euro area members and provide a common backstop to the Single Resolution Fund, as well as design and monitor any future assistance programs. The ESM has an active funding program, similarly to the World Bank and the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. In 2023, we already completed our funding, which was a combined of 28 billion for the EFSF and the ESM. Since inception, Asian investors have been important investors in our bonds. I personally am in China at least once a year to engage with our key partners. The two issuers need to raise around 30 billion in the absence of crisis, because the two institutions manage the rollover of bond issuances for loans, some of which are fully redeemed by 2070. So I will be coming to Asia and China a lot in the future. As permanent successor to the EFSF, the ESM stands ready to provide financial assistance to euro area members in a well-practiced funding operation. The ESM is not only an issuer of bonds, it's also an investor of 80.5 billion euros paid in capital prudently to ensure we retain the ESM AAA credit rating and we can secure the lowest possible cost of borrowing for our members. But environmental, social, governance factors are all in our corporate mission statement. That means the ESM follows a holistic approach to sustainability issues in its investments. Lending operations, social dimension, European solidarity, making reforms more sustainable. Countries made impressive turnarounds. All are investment grade now. since the Greek upgrade last month. In funding, continued dialogue with ESG rating agencies. Social aspect of our funding is that the ESM bonds contribute to social stability, and ad hoc sustainable frameworks for dedicated social programs, such as the pandemic crisis support credit line. Strategic priority: integrate ESG into the balance sheet, integrate ESG into macro analysis and financial stability, review existing instruments of our toolkit from ESG perspective, embed ESG framework for investments such as UN PRI. The ESM is an investor with 80.5 billion euro paid-in capital, the highest from all international financial institutions. The institution invests in ESG-themed bonds, but also takes a full balance sheet approach to its investments. We speak about bonds of issuers who communicate on their ESG strategy through ESG ratings, as well as ESG internal policies. We published our first ever ESG summary report this summer, a one-stop appraisal of the ESM's own activities, and disclosed in that report, as well as our annual report in June, how we have applied ESG scoring to our investments. In 2022, the ESM selected Moody's VGO as its ESG rating provider. When applying the ESG scores to the paid-in capital, the ESM obtained an ESG-weighted score of 73 out of 100 last year, corresponding to Moody's advanced category. In December, we will further report on our investments as a signatory to the United Nations-backed Principles of Responsible Investments. In conclusion, while there is global uncertainty, Europe is financially more resilient today than a decade ago. The IMF World Economic Outlook forecasts for 2024 a soft landing for the world economy and is more optimistic than in the previous year. Saving rates are higher in Europe, and the financial architecture is stronger than a decade ago. There is a positive impact from Next Generation EU, the European Commission's 800 billion temporary recovery instrument to support the economic recovery from the pandemic and build a greener, more digital, and more resilient future. But we realize that Europe is part of the international financial system. So there is an even longer-term challenge that will be overcome and must be overcome. Europe and the world need to keep up momentum in digital change in financial markets, as well as ecological transition to counter climate change. So what are the difficulties for Europe to overcome? Perhaps most importantly, we have to continue on our course to deepen economic and monetary union. A lot has been achieved. The euro area is much stronger today than 10 years ago. We await the ratification of the ESM treaty so that the ESM would provide the financial backstop to banks' resolution mechanism, the Single Resolution Fund, and to sever the link between commercial banks' losses and sovereign debt. The trust in the euro area would increase. We are in the midst of a growing European safe assets. Following the pandemic, the asset class has increased to around 1 trillion euros. The ESM and EFSF are among the issuers who contribute to AAA-rated safe assets. Europe needs capital markets union to finance infrastructure and innovation, but also to add private risk sharing to public risk sharing. In Europe, we prize international cooperation, and we look forward to working with the global partners. China has been an important global partner since inception of ESM and EFSF. We look forward to continuing this important relationship for the decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anif Jensen. So Europe is the most important section in terms of our economy. So introduced the stabilizing mechanism of Europe and how much a role it played as a stabilizer. He stressed that although currently the world is faced with uncertainty, but the financial system of Europe is much more resilient than 10 years ago. So in April and May, the successful handling for the Swiss credit bank, it is a very good proof. We are convinced that the stabilization of Europe is actually very important to the global economy stabilization. So dear guests, according to our agenda, we have now finished the first part of the session. We saved 5 minutes. So now we have a 15 minutes break. So now, please feel free to ask questions, exchange contact with the speakers.
Welcome back, dear colleagues. The second session starts now. I first give the floor to the Chief Representative for Asia Pacific of France, Mr. Steven, to address us. Let's welcome him.
Distinguished leaders and guests, it's a great pleasure to be with you at this 2023 Financial Street Forum, and it's my honor to give you a speech on a very hot topic in this period of uncertainty and volatility which threaten and jeopardize financial and economic stability. Today I would like to share Banque de France perspective on ways to strengthen global economic and financial resilience. I will make my presentation at two levels, multilateral and national. We just had the European one. I will start with a view on the tensions facing multilateralism and in response, the three needs that must be met to enhance financial and economic resilience, as presented by Governor of Banque de France, François Villeroy-de-Galhau, on the occasion of the IMF General Meeting in Marrakech last October. I will then give you a French perspective on ways we act to preserve economic and financial resilience on a three-tiers approach consisting of anticipation, cooperation, and adaptation. Let me start with tension in multilateralism and responses to be delivered. Nationalism is on the rise and is jeopardizing international cooperation exactly at a time when we need it most. Let me explain. Probably more than ever, the global community must safeguard and deliver on existing public goods. Ecological transition to address climate change, pandemic preparedness, digitalization and cybersecurity, financial and economic resilience in the face of increased global debt, to name just four of them. In response to this crisis, three needs must be met. The first step is to honor our commitment on the reforms of the Bretton Woods international financial institutions. Some of them are on the table already. One has been achieved. The global community has delivered on its commitment to rechannel at least 100 billion of SDR to the countries that need it most. Additional resources will have to be raised, and funds governance would be improved if, as it is currently discussed, a 25th share of the IMF board for African countries is created. Looking beyond the IMF, we have to move on to modernize as swiftly as possible the multilateral development banks. The G20 declaration rightly called to enhance the financial capacity of the World Bank and more generally to foster better, bigger and more effective multilateral development banks. The next step is to go beyond these measures to truly reinvigorate multilateral cooperation and address the flaws in the current system. Multilateralism is at a crossroad. It must evolve in order to survive, or else it may die. First, we need to move towards unquestionable fairness in the governance of international financial institutions, as also advocated by the French President Emmanuel Macron. This means ensuring a fairer seat at the table for developing countries. But the emerging countries that will benefit from this, including China, will have to follow common rules of the game. This includes their fair share of debt restructuring and of the financing of global public goods, starting with climate change. Second, the global economic governance should be formalized and given a strong political impetus. Economic governance should be formalized, a strong political impetus, building on the G20's leading role in this area. In operational terms, this revised G20 could be provided formal rules of governance, including qualified majority voting in some areas, while a permanent secretariat could be provided by reform international financial institution. The third need relates to the functioning of the international monetary system. Despite the end of the Bretton Woods system in the 1970s, the US dollar still plays a dominant role. Nevertheless, its decline, while very gradual, in the share of global foreign exchange reserves and the current geopolitical situation, it continues to be an anchor to the international monetary system. But it would be worse than anything else to shift from a dollar-denominated system to a confrontational or a fragmented non-system. The global community would be better off discussing the evolution of the international monetary system in a coordinated international dialogue based on a few practical guiding principles. First, fostering cross-border payment and digitalization to achieve a more efficient international system of payment. Second, developing a consistent regulatory of crypto assets and the so-called private stablecoins that does not undermine public confidence in the financial system. Third, the currencies of this multipolar system, including, of course, the euro and probably starting with those of the SDR basket, should all commit to rules of convertibility and stability. And four, reviving our crisis prevention capacity under the principle of the IMF integrated policy framework. To sum up, on the multilateral level, we believe that only through further dialogue and through commitment to follow the same international rules, we'll be able to safeguard the international financial structure, which is so essential to global stability. After the multilateral level, I will now give you a national perspective on ways we act in France to preserve economic and financial resilience. We were given the European perspective. This French approach is a three-tiers approach combining anticipation, cooperation, and adaptation for the so-called macroprudential regulation, which is implemented at the national level. I will also give you a few words on microprudential supervision and regulation, which is enforced at the European level and known as the single supervision mechanism. First, anticipation. Banque de France is closely monitoring financial stability by a dedicated body, the Financial Stability Pool, which brings together staff, data, analysis from the Banking Supervisory Authority and Directorate in charge of market and operation. In its last publication, issued in June, after the bank stress, the so-called assessment of risk to the French financial system underlined the following 3 points. The French financial system has proven resilient given the number of shocks it has been through in the past months, namely economic slowdown, geopolitical tensions, bank stress in the US, tightening of monetary policy. Second, risks remain elevated, especially the risk of a disorderly market correction in an event of an economic or geopolitical surprise. These risks arise from the combined high leverage ratio of non-financial participants in the context of rising interest rates, the vulnerability to liquidity and market risk of some investment funds, the high valorization of real estate and stocks, cyber threats and climate change structural risks to which financial institutions must accelerate their adaptation. Third conclusion of our assessment report, in the face of this risk, the French financial systems has significant buffers and assets, a high level of capital and liquidity for banks. The Core Tier 1 capital is close to 16%, NPL ratio 3.3%. the liquidity short-term ratio 147%, a stable and diversified funding structure, a credit mainly at fixed rate for non-financial institutions, especially in the real estate sector, and a robust financial infrastructure and sound supervision as proven by the regular stress test to economic shocks and climate risks conducted by Banque de France. Second, anticipation is the second pillar to preserve financial stability at a national level. Will be cooperation between Banque de France, the relevant authorities, the Banking Supervision Authority, the Financial Market Authority, and the Accounting Authority, with Ministry of Finance, in order to better monitor and guarantee financial and monetary stability. A dedicated structure, the High Council for Financial Stability, headed by the Minister of Finance, is the French macroprudential authority, tasked with supervising the financial system as a whole with the aim of safeguarding its financial stability and ensuring a sustainable contribution to economic growth. It meets this body, this High Council, on a regular basis to monitor risks to financial stability, largely based on Banque de France assessment. It adopts, on proposal of the Governor of Banque de France, transitional macroprudential measures compulsory to the financial system, like additional capital buffers, systemic risk buffer, or counter-cyclical buffer, or additional measures regarding Pillar 1 requirements or credit standards for living. After anticipation and cooperation, the third pillar to preserve financial stability is adaptability. Based on the analysis of risk to financial stability, the macroprudential framework is revised regularly and, if necessary, adapted to a given situation of risk. As examples of recent decision, end of 2022, the High Council decided an additional contracyclical buffer of 50 basis points, effective starting in January 24. In July 2023, a systemic risk buffer of 3% for credit to large and highly indebted corporates was decided in replacement of risk credit division rules on large corporates. As regards to microprudential supervision of banks, it is implemented at the European level in the so-called single supervision mechanism. I would like to stress rapidly that that in Europe, our approach to the supervision of banks is based on three main principles. First, equality and proportionality, meaning the same rule apply to all banks so as to guarantee a level playing field, but also taking in account their specificities. And in Europe, Basel III rules apply to all banks, whatever the size, which is a huge difference with the American situation in which Basel III rules apply to only 13 banks. Second principle, transparency of the rule of law, ensuring that the banks know the rules and that they are all publicly available. And third, permanent dialogue with the industry in the elaboration and implementation of the supervision rules as a way to ensure these rules are better understood and therefore applied by all players. Dear distinguished leaders and guests, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a period of high volatility and uncertainty at a multilateral and national level, putting at risk economic and financial stability. This action has to be implemented at both levels to guarantee resilience of our economy and of our financial system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Latouche, for your speech. So, from multilateral views, he proposed the method for strengthening global financial governance and to reinforce the basic structures of global governance. And Banque de France has been a bank of systemic importance. And we have a commercial bank, but for Banque de France, they are a central bank of systemic importance. So he introduced to us some of their practices and experiences. And it's with special notice, and we need to learn from those experiences. Our next speaker is Mr. Lin Hai, co-president of International Markets for MasterCard. Distinguished leaders, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good evening, I should say. It's been late. It's an honor to have the opportunity to attend this year's Financial Street Forum on behalf of MasterCard. So this is the second year we are up here on this stage. So today, I'm very happy to be here to work together with People's Bank of China, Beijing Municipal Government, and other partners to extend my most cordial thank you for your support and collaboration. So nowadays, the world we're in is faced with a series of challenges. In this big environment, how can we maintain growth? It's becoming a shared problem for government, businesses, and individuals. Meanwhile, we witnessed the surging and development of new technologies and the hopes they brought. Resilience is a key word of this forum. So next, my sharing is also going to be carried out under resilience. So for me, resilience means that we need to cope with challenges and recover from setbacks. Resilience does not appear from thin air or get accidentally. It needs to be planned. For businesses and countries, in order to prosper in an ever-changing big environment, resilience is the key. In my perspective, in order to construct a digital ecosystem that is competitive, secure, and inclusive enough, interconnectivity and digital inclusiveness are worth our close attention. So first, let me talk about consumption resilience. According to our latest data insight, I'd like to share with you our view on consumption resilience and economic situation. First, the employment market continues to be strong. This factor will have a key impact on the expenditures of consumers. When people have work, they will get paid, and then they will have money to consume to satisfy their demands. So take the U.S., for example. This undersupply of labor is still continuing, although there has been some sliding in the past week or so, but it shows that for job seekers and opportunities, it's still 1 versus 1.5. In the Eurozone this August, unemployment rate has decreased to 6.4%, a record low. And secondly, despite the rising inflation, but recently we have seen signs of relieving. So with the use of policy tools used by the central banks of the world, inflation's influence for different markets and industries will further diverge. In the Eurozone, inflation in October has decreased to 2.9%, reaching the lowest point in the past 2 years. In China, the consumption market continues to recover. CPI grew, realizing a 0.2% growth. So we expect the tightening policy will continue until inflation falls to the tangible targets. Third is the normalization of transporter activities. Data shows that by Q3, transporter payment has increased by 20%, and the volume has reached 155% of the same period in 2019. This reflected consumption resilience and strong transporter growth. In China, in the Mid-Autumn Festival and also the National Day of the Golden Week, people who entered China reached 11 million, which was an increase of 2.9 times, reaching 85% of the year of 2019. And there is still space for growth. While contributing to consumption resilience of the globe, with our global network and our long-term local operation, we constantly provide comprehensive payment services and product for markets including China, advancing recovery. This year in Q2, together with Alipay and WeChat, we have launched a total new card membership service, helping the international travelers to scan the code and pay. So after the service is launched, the use of the two payment services increased. And in October, the daily membership increased by 6 to 7 times, especially from the United States, South Korea, Singapore, and the Hong Kong and Taiwan area of China. So this measure not just significantly improved the consumption experience of the inbound travelers, they also cover taxis, takeout, and other small sum but highly frequent payment scenarios, helping the small businesses of 140 million to get more international customers. So next, let me talk about policies. So how can we view this interconnectivity? In the world today, more than any time before, we need interconnectivity. And then any time before, we need to strengthen interconnectivity. In this process, we more and more see that the intangible assets, including data, services, including the skills they have become the mainstay of the commercial factor flow. From 2010 to 2019, international students and the patent flow has been twice as high as trading goods, and the increase of data flow is about 50%. Digital trade can help the workers that have the good education to get better pay. And the flow of data transporter is now the foundation of the economic growth of the globe. So these have become a very important impetus for the resilient development. So it is fair to say that only interconnectivity can increase our resilience. We see that in order to strengthen resilience, the government has been increasing their standard and requirement to better protect privacy, to entrust the digital trust, and allow private sector to participate, to build a world economy that's vibrant for different markets. We need higher level of interconnectivity, transporter, merchandise, services, capitals, and data flow needs to be collected seamlessly. At MasterCard, the building of resilience is at two considerations. So the first is that how to avoid systemic risk because of the single point problem, and secondly, when faced this internet threat, how can we ensure that everybody in our system can be protected? As a result, we have been committed to work together with government departments, organizations, and partners to build an open, safe, and inclusive digital payment system while injecting momentum to the digital ecosystem. We ensure the demand of each and every party can be fully satisfied. Interconnectivity for the government, private sector, and consumers are all beneficial, no matter it is in China or for the globe. it is so. It is also worth mentioning that to strengthen interconnectivity should not sacrifice security and the other inclusiveness of economy, as well as privacy. We have reasons to expect that the future policies will continue to strengthen trust and improve investment and support digital economy trade represented by transport payment and e-commerce. So the next week we will have the APEC Leaders Summit. This is a very important platform that is committed to shared standard, improved connectivity, and pan-region economic growth. I expect this conference will continue to deepen the platform role and continue to advance the advancement, access, security, and regulation of digital service. So at last, I'd like to talk about inclusiveness for digital. So in order to strengthen resilience, there is another factor that we need to pay attention to, that is the inclusiveness of digital services. So the world today has been through a lot of impact, and small businesses and people with limited resources bear the brunt of the influence. We are convinced that with the coverage of digital economy become bigger, development opportunities will be waving their hands to the latecomers. With the rise of the total market, the economies will have a bigger strength to resist shocks, attract investment, and encourage innovation. And most importantly, it is trust. Trust is the fundamental starting point of digital inclusiveness. It is the starting point of everything, and it is a prerequisite for digital economy to run itself. When we internalize trust as the initial aspiration of technology, digital economy will for sure more fully release its potential. At practical level, we use the right method to do innovation and technology application with open bank, digital identity, and internet cybersecurity. Deploy those on our digital inclusiveness, improve opportunity to strengthen resilience. And additionally, public and private sector, public and businesses collaboration is vital. As the Asian saying goes, when people have the same aspiration, they can move a mountain. We believe that to build a digital inclusiveness that is found based on trust, oriented by technology and multi-party collaboration will improve global resilience.
MasterCard has been rooted in China for 30 years. It's a beneficiary of China's profound development potential and an active participant in its high-quality development. Facing the new development landscape and the dynamics, we not only have the most sincere wish, but also have the sufficient capability. We look forward to working with the government and the local partners to contribute to quality development here and establish a safe, resilient, and interconnected digital ecosystem. Empowering China to achieve inclusive growth and sustainable development is our mission and also helps to improve the global economy and financial resilience. We are full of expectations to serve the local market and become a trustworthy network bridging China and the world. Thank you. I thank you, Mr. Lin Hai. And I congratulate Mr. Lin Hai on solving some of the conundrum in accessing the Chinese market. And actually, they have saved the energy of taking step-by-step growth, but actually has making the most of China's digital payment. And in Mr. Lin Hai's speech, he mentioned about the key production factors, as well as share with us what the MasterCard can do in this contribution to a more resilient market, financial market. Next, I give the floor to Jenny Henry, Global Chief Economist at HSBC.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be talking at the Financial Street Forum. So the first point I want to make in my outlook for the global economy is that this is not a normal cycle. We know that, certainly I do, you do, with the pandemic, the various wars, the huge shifts in monetary and fiscal policy, and of course some transformational shifts in the form of AI. Are all factors that have happened in the last few years that will impact on the pace of disinflation in the coming years and the pace and the mix of growth that follows in the years after. Yet even though we know that, financial markets have still had a tendency to view things like any other cycle. As we saw, for instance, in much of this year, the Fed have been raising rates quite aggressively, and as soon as there was the banking sector turmoil, financial markets took the view that once again the Fed had raised rates, it had caused financial instability risks, and that rates would follow downwards pretty sharply. That, of course, was not the case. The Fed has continued to tighten policy, and it's only recently that financial conditions more broadly have started to tighten more aggressively. And certainly the message from the central banks, the major central banks, the Fed and the ECB, has been that they now hope that policy is restrictive enough to ensure that as long as it's kept restrictive, it will drive inflation gradually back to target, even if that does take until 2026 in terms of what's in the Fed's projections. And the fact is, the interest rate increases that we have seen over the course of the last couple of years are starting to hurt parts of the population, some households and some companies. We can, for instance, see what's happened in terms of European bankruptcies. We can also see certain areas of households. The fact is, if you are reliant on consumer credit on your credit card in the US and are paying a 22% interest rate, then the likelihood that you've defaulted has certainly risen quite sharply. But if you are a homeowner in the US, and particularly if you are half of homeowners in the US and you have no mortgage, you've seen no rise in debt service costs, and in fact you're finally seeing a higher return on your savings deposits. And even if you do have a mortgage in the US, you probably amongst the 90% or more that actually have them tied into long-term interest rates, and you're not paying 8% mortgage rates, you're actually paying on average about 3.5%. So as far as the vulnerabilities on the financial strain side are concerned, in the US we are not overly concerned about the outlook for household balance sheets. Yes, some are hurting quite a lot, but more broadly, when you look at household balance sheets in the US, you can see that the rise in the debt service ratio in the US is way below where it was in pre-pandemic times. Well, actually, it's more or less in line with pre-pandemic, but certainly well below where it was at the time of the financial crisis. There is more of a risk on the corporate sector side, particularly small companies, the ones that are reliant on more variable rate loans that are not haven't done their refinancing for 5 or 10 years back in 2020, they are now paying a significantly higher rate. For small firms, it now averages more like about 10%. Over time, the longer that rates stay high for, the bigger impact on their debt service costs, the more it is likely to feed through in the form of some impact on investment spending and, of course, on hiring and willingness to continue to hoard labour if they're not able to be sufficiently profitable in order to do so. So that slowdown in hiring will impact on employment growth. But the other part of the household sector that we need to think about is not just the employment side, but what's happening to the real wage picture. And the broad story in both Europe and the US is that inflation has so far slowed more than wage growth actually has. So that kind of 2-year squeeze that we had on real wages is now behind us, and it is now broadly positive. Yes, we are looking for a slowdown in consumer spending, but it is not a traditional consumer recession because we're not looking for a big jump in unemployment, and we've still got these uncertainties regarding savings. If we look at the flow of savings in Europe, they've not lowered their savings rates. They're still above pre-pandemic levels. In the US, they have run down their savings. but it's still key areas of uncertainty. And our projections of a slowdown, and quite an extended one, we're certainly not looking for a V-shaped recovery, the savings picture could pose risks on either side. And in terms of the impact of China, which is obviously very important for the world trade cycle and particularly important for trade dynamics in Europe, the challenge for Europe is the new mix and pace of growth in China. As China addresses the structural challenges in the local government debt and the property sector, and if it succeeds in transitioning growth towards more consumer-driven growth and more high-tech related growth, they're not really areas that European capital goods producers are tied into. There's going to be no easy lift from a revival in electrical machinery or electrical vehicles from China. Europe does not produce nickel or lithium and such like. So the issue for Europe is that until we see, particularly in Germany, a real turn in the world trade cycle, growth is likely to disappoint. I mentioned that we're not looking for a traditional recession in the US or indeed in the broad Eurozone, even if it is stagnating and almost flirting with a recession. But Germany, given some of its loss of competitiveness and its overdependence on trade, Germany is actually in recession, and we still look for a contraction in full-year GDP in the course of 2024. But turning to the inflation backdrop, the main point I want to make about inflation at the moment, because there's so much that we could talk about, is the fact that the renewed impact of inflation volatility is reminding us that we are now in a different era. In the past, when we had a rise in oil prices, even something on par with what we saw in the course of September when Saudi Arabia cut back on oil supply and actually pushed up oil prices, in the past it may have raised inflation, but actually we saw relative price adjustments, it squeezed spending, slowed demand for other goods and services, and saw this relative price adjustment bring core inflation somewhat lower. Now, getting it now, when inflation has been above target for 2.5 years or more, the risk is that this renewed volatility increases the risk of inflation persistence, that it impacts on price-setting behaviour. Some US companies are seeing tumbling input prices, whether it's imports from Asia or other container costs and such like. But if they don't know where their energy costs, or indeed maybe their labour costs, are going to be a couple of months from now, then they're not going to pass on any other input cost reductions until they absolutely have to. And that's really the risk for central banks at the moment. Inflation has fallen enough, quite a lot, but it hasn't fallen enough. It's still some way above their targets, and labour markets are still quite tight. And obviously what we're seeing, even in the US, is now some evidence of multi-year pay deals. The auto workers' strike has obviously been in huge focus in the US. It's not economy-wide by any means. It's tens of thousands of workers, not hundreds of millions. But this is also a feature of Europe, where there is more collectivised wage bargaining and multi-year pay deals are more typical. And even if the wage settlement for 2024 is lower than for 2023, in many cases it's still not consistent with getting back to 2% inflation. So central banks are not going to send a sign anytime soon that they are looking to ease policy. They will still continue to give that message that policy needs to stay restrictive for some time to come. So in terms of summarising our rate views, we still think that policy will stay tight for some time. Our first rate cut that we're forecasting for the Federal Reserve is in the third quarter of 2024. We expect the ECB to cut right at the end of 2024. It could be that the Bank of England actually has to wait until 2025, and we finally expect the Bank of Japan to exit the negative rate policy in the second half of 2024. But overall, what we're saying is that this is going to be a fairly gentle easing cycle. We need to remember that we still have a few more years of disinflation ahead of us. Policy still needs to remain somewhat restrictive, even if the drop in inflation means that we do get some rate cuts. And because we are not looking for a big rise in unemployment, we're not looking for a lot of slack to be generated, we do not have a V-shaped recovery happening. So even by the end of 2025, we're talking about a total easing cycle of about 125 basis points. So overall, in terms of our medium-term outlook for the advanced economies and even for global growth, we think that the medium-term outlook is somewhat different to pre-pandemic. The global growth, inflation, interest rate trade-off has deteriorated. So lower growth, higher inflation, and certainly no negative or zero interest rate world during the course of the medium term. And we are very much of the view that the long-term R-star, the long-term equilibrium rate is now higher. How much higher is obviously still open to debate, but we've seen a definite shift in the savings investment balance with growing investment and spending needs by governments, in particular in the coming years, against a backdrop of, I suppose, shrinking savings being generated by ageing populations globally and increasingly fragmented savings pools. But even in this world of a deteriorating global growth, inflation, interest rate trade-off, as always, there will always be relative outperformers. Some of those outperformers will be sectoral. I haven't had time in this presentation to talk much about technology, but certainly we only need to look at where there's been a lot of R&D spending and a lot of investment spending. It has been by the tech companies, in particular in the US, and some of this has been incentivized by government incentives, but it will be the users of technology. And increasingly that will be some high employment sectors, whether it's medical care, whether it's professional services or education, or professional and business services. And there'll also be geographical outperformers. We actually think that there are a few emerging economies out there that may even be on a stronger growth footing post-pandemic than they were pre-pandemic. And amongst those are countries with some pretty impressive growth fundamentals in particular. We're talking about some emerging economies where they've got strong population growth, where they've got a key comparative advantage in certain areas, like India does, for instance, in a growing array of service sectors. And if those countries, if they can raise their investment rates, and if they can navigate some conflicting geopolitical pressures elsewhere in the world, we think that they will be on a sounder footing. The countries that we point to that may actually be on a stronger footing than pre-pandemic include India, but also some other Asian economies like Vietnam and Indonesia, parts of the GCC, UAE and Saudi Arabia, in terms of the structural reforms they've been delivering. Their non-oil sectors may be more rapid. And in Latin America, coming off a lower base, the likes of Brazil, it used to, over the last decade, only grow at 0.5%. It may be able to grow at 2%. But again, better than pre-pandemic. So overall, in terms of my presentation, this hasn't been a normal expansion. We're not looking for a traditional recession or a traditional V-shaped recovery. We have something more protracted. This is still going to be a multi-year period where central banks strive to get back to their inflation targets. That still means only a gradual easing cycle when the time comes, certainly not getting back to anything like pre-pandemic rates. Haven't talked so much about the emerging economies. We still see Latin America leading the way, and our medium-term outlook is one of a deteriorating global growth, inflation, interest rate trade-off, but there will, as always, be some outperformers. Some of them will be sectoral, those that can really capitalise on technological advancements, and some of them are some large emerging economies where some growth fundamentals have improved. Thank you very much.
感谢韩瑞女士的精彩演讲。作为全球系统重要性银行的首席经济学家，韩瑞女士呢非常专业地分析了当前全球经济周期的特殊性。
Madam Henry very professionally analyzed the economic growth, inflation, and interest rate. The relations has been changed significantly. And for the policy path, she has provided a very good forecast. So I believe you have learned a lot from her speech. So we're entering the last part, summary. Distinguished guests, dear friends, we have finished our agenda. So influenced by the pandemic, China and the global economies have been, we experienced the lockdowns. And then we have recoveries by different sectors. And then we have comprehensive recovery. And then now we're having this great development. So I believe this evening will further facilitate consensus building so that all parties will participate in international macroeconomic policy coordination so that we can really supplement each other's policy and contribute to the community of shared future for mankind. So on behalf of the organizer, I'd like to thank you all for the wonderful speeches of the speakers and all the staffs who are working for this conference and our distinguished guests who are present here today. Thank you.